My welcome, dear students. Today we continue talking with you about law regulation in the medical sphere. And today's topic of us is global health law. So there will be not much information on the slides. More information will be in oral speech. So we should first talk with you about global health law, about this international law and public health policy. First of all, we should say that international health law, or what is now so-called global health law, is a relatively new academic field. In this broadest definition, it includes all international legal regimes relevant to public health, international environmental law, international humanitarian and human rights law, international trade and labor law, international law relations to arms control, and so on. Construed more narrowly incorporates only those international legal regimes, especially designed to address health treaties. The two most notable examples are the International Health Regulation, focused on infectious diseases, and the World Health Organization Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, focused on chronic diseases. Also, in the future, I will say it in a short way. Usually, World Health Organization is called WHO, and Framework Controlled on Tobacco Control is called VCTC. I think that it would be necessary. It would be good for you to remember these short names, because in future you can very often meet it in different documents. This is an important distinction between international health law and global health law. International health law connects a more traditional approach derives from rules governing relations among nation states. Global health law, on the other hand, is developing an international structure based on the world as a community, not just a collection of nation states. This structure is inclusive of individuals and non-governmental organizations, especially where health problems are seen as truly global. Globalization has heightened the need for worldwide public health cooperation. The field of global health law and the contribution of international organizations to its development are also described. The growth and elaboration of the field of global health law in the last 2 decades is one of the most notable developments in global health policy. In this new era of global health governance, international law has an important, albeit limited role to play in promotion and coordination of international cooperation and national action to protect and promote global health. Particular attention is paid to the global impact of binding international agreements and other international legal instruments developed under the auspice of the World Health Organization, as we already called it WHO, and the World Trade Organization, we also called it WTO. The domain of global health law now encompasses increasingly diverse concerns, including aspects of biomedical science and human reproduction or cloning, organ transplantation and xenotransplantation, infections and non-communicable diseases, the control of the safety of health service, food and pharmaceuticals in international trade, access to medicine, and the control of addictive and harmful substances such as tobacco or, for example, narcotics. Global health law is also increasingly linked to other traditional areas of international legal concern. Environmental law and the control of toxic pollution, arms control, and the banning of weapons of mass destruction, human rights law, nuclear safety law and radiation protection, international drug control, custom law, also occupational law and safety are increasingly recognized as an inextricably connection to public law. So you see, global health law is an area of law which controls a big, a great even area of regulation of different relations in international worldwide problems and find the regulation and the solving of problems also in the worldwide global area. So the moral purpose of international health relations. In this case, we talk about the situation when global health relatives present compelling moral imperatives. Among the major issues of our time are global health, inequality, and global health externalities posing fatal and mortalities. Health inequalities sorry, are morally shocking and growing around the world. For example, a child born today in Afghanistan is 86 times as likely to die by age 5 as a child born in Singapore, while a girl, for example, born in Sierra Leone and can expect to live 45 fewer years on average than can her Japanese counterpart. Thus, while average global life expectancy has increased by 20 years over the past of 5 degrees, the very poorest countries have been left behind. So we see the regulation and the great problem also of international health relation are in the situation that different countries have different regulation, different levels of medicine, and other different solving of the global problems. Additionally, in a globalized world, the threats of morbidity and mortality have no nation boundaries, of course. The international spread of pathogenic risks to health is also morally shocking. Globalization and its continuously expanding connection among people and places worldwide means that a deadly organism or toxic consumer production in one corner of the world can, within a day, cause injury, disease, and death in another. So there can't be just the problem of one country, it should be the problem of the whole world. Negative externalities are particularly problematic. If we talk about the questions of even some problems which can be called like ecological. For example, if we talk about some poisoned materials or, for example, some toxic paints and also drug resistant, about other global questions. We also talk about others which are around the world, not depending upon the country. For example, the tuberculosis can't be ignored, and tuberculosis doesn't. It ignores, tuberculosis ignores national borders, and it threatens people around the world, not depending from which country you are. In this situation, we talk about the aggression through the way solving this problem through the surveillance, through the contact tracing, through the epidemiological investigations, consumer protections, and control systems, and international, national, and subnational levels. So not depending upon where, but it should be the problem which is in a process of solving. So a world divided by health inequalities, and one is which random pathogens and deadly toxic can kill in an instant, poses ethical challenges for the global health community. International cooperation in health to address these issues is complex and challenges. It must address both international externals and it can threaten health. As an example, we can say about the spread of infections, agents, or pathogens across borders, transcending individual states. For example, as coronavirus and some other diseases which are already much older than coronavirus and so on. We should understand that the world needs theories of global health justice to propose principles, policies, and tools to address these inequalities and threats, and to frame international and national collective actions. Talking about the global health equity, we should say that one such theory of global health justice, which builds on a theory of health and social justice, have advanced over the past decade. States the society's obligation to maintain and improve health rests on the ethical principles of human flourishing is human capability. This approach has roots in Aristotle's political theory and Amartya Sen's capability approach, but it moved extensively beyond and considerably extend this work for national and global health purposes. From these perspectives, health is intrinsically and instrumentally available. All individuals should have equal capability to be healthy. Doesn't depend upon the country or the place of living, the economical situation in this country, and so on. So it takes the individual as the central moral unit of this justice. Of course, if we talk about the health, we talk about the situation when there's no even moral ways of thinking that one person can be higher than another in health, moral, ethical regulation. We talked with you about it already. When we talk about moral and ethical principles, one of the main principles of medical workers, and there we talked about the law equality between the people, that the help, especially in the health sphere, should be given in equal way, not depending upon the money, depend upon the race, and so on. Help should be equal to everybody. So under this approach, if we value instrumentally and instrumentally individuals' capabilities to be healthy, we regard deprivation of health capabilities as inequalities and individuals' capabilities to function. Decrements in a person's health constitute direct threats to his or her well-being and agencies. Health capabilities are therefore prerequisites to other capabilities, and their moral importance calls for a sense of urgency. From this perspective, a global society and its constituent national states must address global health inequalities and global threats to human health. Primary moral responsibility falls on national states, within which health inequalities and the source of health threats lies. So the question then turns to what is meant by global health law. This approach argues for the provision of capabilities for good health rather than for complete health equality, recognizing that individuals have different health capabilities. Producing equal outcomes is not the main goal, actually. Global health equality rather involves equal realization of individual health potential. This approach takes a shortfall rather than an attainment perspective on equality. It asserts their threshold or norm of health against which is measure gaps in health performance. So these analyses focuses less on the accomplishments of health system and health policies and more on what level of health should be possible and how to apply resources to attend it. So shortfall equality can help assesses quantitatively, quantitatively, how much it gives to the society, and to which level has it reached as health potential and how much remains unrealized because the shortfall perspective compaces the actual achievement of a given public policy or health system with the stated health norms. So achieving global health equality requires reducing shortfall inequalities and central health capability worldwide. Also I want to example you some international legal instruments in worldwide legal regulation, which are the examples of worldwide domain international law related to public health, including international agreements that have positive as well as negative implements for public health. Actually, on this picture, you can see the main times, period of times in which they were created most of the international documents and the period of the growing of the international and global health law. Talking about the documents, first of all, we should talk about the categories of public health concern. It has a lot of different categories. For example, the first category about which we should talk is the disability, and we should say that in 2006 there was created an international agreement, Convention of the Right of Person with Disabilities. This document is very important because of the regulation rights of those social part of the nation which are under the main risk with the special disabilities. If we talk about the category of public health concerns such as communicable disease control, we will call International Health Regulation Agreement, which was created in 2005. Regulation of global tobacco control has even three legal documents such as pandemic influenza preparedness framework, the WHO framework convention of tobacco control is one of the main and the oldest, and protocol to eliminate illegal tobacco in tobacco products. So in this area there are even three documents which were created in 2011, 2003 and 2012. You can also see some of them on the picture. Talking about the category of human rights, this one area is one of the most popular in creation of international agreements because it's one of the main. So here we talk about the oldest, one of the oldest. In 1966 there were created even two agreements such as International Convent of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights and International Convention of Civil and Political Rights. So you see the relations which are close to these rights are regulated by this convention. Also in 1979 that was created the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. In 1980 Convention on certain convention weapons, weapons. 1984 Convention against tortures and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. In 1989 Convention of the Rights of the Child. So we see here the main and it's the main conventions which regulate the main principles and the main rights of the humans all over the world. For example, if we talk about arm control, there are also a lot of conventions such as Chemical Weapon Convention of 1993, Biological Weapon Convention of 1972, Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty of 1996, Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons of 1968, and so on. Also rather big number of international agreements which control a big also number of big area of regulation. So as usual the weapon is the item which creates the bad situation for humanity. It also should be controlled. So talking about the environmental health, so here are the Vienna Convention for the protection of the ozone layer of 1985, Montreal Protocol to the Vienna Convention for the protection of the ozone layer, it's like the new parts. They made it wider. Convention on Climate Changes 1992, Convention to Combat Desertification 1994, Convention to the Transborder Effect of Industrial Accidents 1992 also, Kyoto Protocol to 1992 on Convention of Climate Changes of 1997. A lot of environmental health conventions are used to protect the humanity and the ecological regulation on the high level, as nowadays we have a lot of problems of regulation of it, as the environmental pollution is one of the main problems all the world. Also, we can talk about health worker migration, like a regulation of this category. For example, Stockholm Convention on persistent organic pollutants and Minamata Convention on mercury on 2001 and 2013. International narcotic drug control is also one of the most important categories of regulation. Of course, it's hard to regulate the drug control all over the world, but at least they try. So the WHO Global Code of Practice International requirement of health personnel in 2010. In 1961 it was created a single convention on narcotic drugs. In 1971 convention on physiotropic substances. In 1988 convention against illicit traffic in narcotic drugs and physiotropic substance. The next area of regulation is occupational health and safety. The oldest convention, White Lead Painting Convention of 1921. The next one is Protection Against Accident Convention, which was created in 1932. Radiant Protection Convention 1960, Occupational Cancer Convention 1974, Occupational Safety and Health Convention 1981. So also we can talk about trade law, international trade law. Convention concerning the promotional framework for occupation, safety and health of 1994 and 2006. So also the agreements in traffic and trade of 1994, agreements of the application of sanitary and physical measures, agreements of trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights, agreements of technical barriers to trade, all of them of 1994. So as you see, there are a big list, a very big list of different international documents which regulate most of the spheres of global health law. And in this way you can see that the question of its regulation is very important. But even with all those regulations, there are still a lot of problems of regulation on the certain territories, and even if they regulate this question on the global area, there should be also an action on a certain territory of the country with the regulating and trying to improve all the spheres of these relations. So let's talk about the evolution of global health law. The first, we should say that although public health is one of the earliest fields of international cooperation and one of the first domains in which an intergovernmental organizations was created, the scope of international legal cooperation in public health was until recently highly limited. The main problem was in a global community which can't find how to say the unique language to speak and unique way to union all these questions on the one field. So diseases has been the unwelcome traveling companion of international commerce throughout history and international public health cooperation from the beginning was as concerned with facilitating trade as with protecting public health. The functions of the early international health organizations of the 19th and 20th centuries centered on combating infections and communicable diseases and preventing their spread across international boundaries. With the focus limited to international communicable communicable disease control, public health law remained a relatively neglected field of international legal concern throughout most of the 20th century. In particular, the WHO, which was established in 1948 as a specialized agency of the United Nations in the field of health, stood out as unique among such as UN agencies in that organization trading neglected that use of international legislative statutes to promote its global public policies. So the WHO member states also paid little attention to the potential contribution of international law in advancing global health during most of the last century. Although public health remained a narrow realm of multilateral cooperation for over about 150 years, the long-standing historical connection between international law and communicable diseases control pointed to the larger role that international law could serve in future international health diplomacy. So now let's give the definition of global health law, and at last let's go to it. And we should say that in 2008 the science Gostin and Taylor gave such a definition to global health law. That it's a field that encompasses the legal norms, processes, and institutions needed to create the condition for people throughout the world to attain the highest possible level of physical and mental health. So in this situation, you see that they tried to use all the characteristics of the worldwide regulation of the health around the world. So in the last couple of decades, the field of the global health has of the global health law has expanded significantly. The breadth and the depth of contemporary international health law can be traced to a number of recent and interconnected developments. So it can include the first part, the impact of globalization on public health diplomacy. The second part is the growth of the global concern with economic and social rights, including the right to health. So, and the third part is expanding appreciation of the nexus between global health law and other realm of international legal concern. Of course, the evolution of global health law in the last 2 decades is very much tied to the protection and promotion of human rights related to physician and mental integrity. Although global health law is larger utilized the mechanisms to protect and expand state interests in an area of global interdependence. It is also conserved of and employed as a framework or tool and tool for protection the right of individuals and perhaps creating a more just and equitable world. So as you see, the area of questions of global health law in the last period became much wider. Also regulating the questions of the work, the questions of the solving the problems around the world. So from the part of international regulation of some diseases and global problems to the problems of through the problems of individuals such as patients and medicals to the way of looking for the diplomacy in the world among the countries to solve all the problems which are on the way of global health law. So, an impact concern with the formulation of the right to health is whether it is an individual or a collective standard reflecting to health-related interests of communities. As a human right, the conventional interpretation of the right to health pertains to individual and not collective claims. However, in public health practice, the right to health is often used to refer to public or community health. So as you see, if one person is healthy, the whole community is also healthy. There can also be tension between the idea of the collective rights to health and the execution of the other human rights, including liberty, physical integrity, and privacy. So as you see, the way of regulation which was created by most of the countries and international committees and unions now has a rather straight line for regulation of the international health relations. So, talking about an introduction to public international law, we should first say that understanding the implications of recent developments in global health law, including those for domestic public health policy, requires some appreciations of the nature of international law and the international political system. Since the end of the 30-year war in 1948, the global political system has principally involved the interaction of sovereign states. Consequently, the elaboration of international law has focused to the establishment of consensual rule concerning the status of a state and their fundamental rights and obligations was also regulated as well as commitments. International law, therefore, is primarily focused on the interaction of sovereign states and can broadly be defined as the rule that govern the conduct and relations of states. So, in this case, we should also, of course, say that even if we have a lot of international regulation, this regulation will work on the area of the certain government and the certain state just in a case they agree with those statements and agree with these positions of this international document. So they also should change their national legislation to finish the way of regulation from the global to local. So, international law is traditionally understood as consisting of two core realms. Public international law and private international law. While public international law is primarily concerned with the relations of states, private international law focused on the law of private transactions of individuals and corporations. The traditional distinction between public and private international law persists even though it is not fully accurate. For example, much of private international law concerns the transaction of public entities. In addition, while states are the primary subject of public international law, they are not only subjects. International organizations and through the development of international human rights law, individuals are also considered subjects of the public international law. As you of course understand, the individual is one of the main parts of the international health law regulation, because this from the global scene a little point, one individual is the main treasure and the main point of the regulation in every health law regulation. His or her rights, his or her obligations or possibilities, the health of this person, and other basic rights are the main principles which are created for every individual. So, in international law, the source of legal rule are very different than in most domestic legal systems. It comes because the global political system of sovereign states differs fundamentally from the domestic political system. While there are important differences in the source of law among countries, domestic law generally comes from national constitutions, municipal statutes, parliamentary or executive regulations, and decisions of municipal courts. In constant to domestic political system or executive regulations and decisions and sorry, executive regulations. So in domestic political systems, there is generally no supranational authority within the global system to develop and enforce law against sovereign states. In the absence of supernatural authority, states establish the rule of international law. Of course, much harder to regulate the law on the global level, because in this case thoughts of much more people should be pointed and used like a base. So in these cases, of course, there are some international regulations which are based on a union and common principles, and also in these regulations they should use the common understandings and common meanings of the words and legal terms. So although there's a wide and complex area of binding international legal sources, most international law today, including global health, can be found in treaties. The word treaty is a genetic term that encompasses all written instruments concluded between states, by which states established obligations by and among themselves. Treaties function as central and contracts between states, whereby states make binding written rules to govern their own conduct and the conduct of their individuals and corporate nations. When states become parties to treaties, they explicitly agree to limit their sovereign freedom of action in some respect to achieve mutual agreed upon goals. So generally, treaties are only binding upon states and given their express written consent. Of course, the international community can't say that a certain state should do it in a such or in another way, or it should control it. It can control it in such a way to create rules for them, but if the country on the international level and want to be in good relations with others, of course, they should be in diplomatic area community to hear what other countries ask for, or what, for example, the international community says to do. The process of international lawmaking, such as the identification of international legal rules, is very different than it's in the most domestic legal systems. For example, if we say about the usual creation of the rules, legal rules in Russian Federation, we say about just one organ which creates it, of course, with a certain procedure, with certain norms, and it is it takes much time to solve just one little problem. No, not little, but one problem on the territory of the certain government, which has just one legal system, certain legal system. And if we talk about international regulation, of course, there are different systems which should be connected in one, and there is a rather big problem to regulate it in such a comfort way for all the countries which want to take part in this regulation. So, the unique character of the international lawmaking process, such as the international legal rules themselves, can be understood as a consequence of the core principle of state sovereignty. In the international political system, there generally exists no supranational authority to make binding international rules. So, international law allows considerable flexibility in the process by which multilateral agreements are developed. The primary source of international law governing the creation of treaties, the Vienna Convention, provides a limited number of ground rules for the conclusion of treaties concerning the capacity of states to enter into agreements, adoption, and authentication of treaty by the valid representation. Representatives and expressions of concern to be bound by a treaty. So, as you see, the question of regulation in international law by itself, and also in global health law, is one of the most important in the world, because of the most one of the most wide and one of the most important areas of regulation. They differ between a lot of systems. It's the problem of regulation in global health law, and the question of the necessity of using of this part of law and this international regulation. It's rather new. Of course, it was and before 19th and 20th century, but at that time there was no such a wide global system of connections between countries, and nowadays it's much more easier to connect, to work one with another, and to solve the problem in a global area, not just on the territory of one country. So today it's all the information I wanted to give you about the global health law. Thanks for your attention. You can also find much more information in the global internet system, and make your knowledge much wider with this information. Of course, we can find some basic principles of global health law, or for example, you can read much more about its history. So thank you today for your attention. See you on the next lecture. Have a good day. Goodbye.